your meter volume. Give me one more check.
Hello, how you going?
Good. All right, nice one. And before, I don't know if you've listened to my other ones before we cut into this, I would have given a bit of an overview.
I haven't yet, no, I have to say.
Unbelievable. Fucking piece of shit.
I need to go and do that. Call for me.
It's all right. I'm sure you'll listen to your own one.
Not to begin with. I wait a little bit.
No.
So I was like, oh no, what did I not say?
Don't worry, your face is not on it.
Yeah, all right, I'll be there.
Welcome to the Future of Podcasts, where I deep dive into discussions with remarkable founders and industry experts, and together we explore the challenges of today and how they are innovating through them to shape a brighter tomorrow. Today I'm in conversation with James McKemey, Head of External Affairs at Pod Point Ltd, a leading electric vehicle or EV charging infrastructure company in the UK. James, Pod Point's most long-standing member, has been instrumental in the company's growth from a small team to its IPO on the London Stock Exchange in November 2021. His work with government, media and industry has significantly influenced UK legislation on zero-emission goals, building regulations, charge point readiness, smart charging, public charging and EV tax and grant incentive programs. In this episode, we discuss EV trends, adoption and their environmental impact, the economics of electrical power, the falling costs of resources and the total cost of ownership of EVs, the future of V2X, vehicle to load, vehicle to grid and more, battery evolution and its industry impact, and how EVs are stabilizing the grid, among other things. As EV capability, cost and consumer demand converge, it seems we're at a critical juncture for the industry. Now, learning about these innovations from James, who's not just an industry expert but a close personal friend, was incredibly enjoyable. So with that, I'm excited to present to you James McKemey, Head of External Affairs, Pod Point Ltd. So James, welcome.
Cheers, Ian. Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Yeah, work it. Is that a delay or are you just waiting for the first question?
Yeah, I know. It's just like, I don't know what to say. It was. I thought it was very familiar, wasn't it? Cheers, Ian. How you doing?
Yeah. Oh, that's good. You all right?
Yeah.
You need to be a bit more reactive. I don't know if the internet stalled out or you're just sat there waiting for me to finish my sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah, in my introduction, I alluded to the fact that you and I are good friends. We've known each other for a while, so I'm privileged to call you a close friend of mine. If we go off track a little and cruise down memory lane, apologies to the audience. But yeah, James, thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited for the conversation.
Oh, that's lovely. I've just lost connection.
Let's try this again.
Sweet.
All right, geez. I wonder if it caught the other recording. But anyway, all right. James, welcome.
Hello, Ian. Thank you very much indeed, mate. Super reactive.
Oh, God. So yeah, let's maybe kick us off, James. If you want to give us a bit of an intro to yourself, your area of focus, and why you're focused on it.
Yeah, so I'm just transitioning to Head of External Affairs at Pod Point. That's my role. Pod Point's a significant charging infrastructure player in the UK, charging infrastructure for electric cars, that is. I'm the longest serving employee now, so I've had several roles. I've been there since February 2011. As you alluded to, we go back a little bit before that. So physicist through university alongside your good self. Came out of that and did 5 years of environmental consultancy. Then I had to think, okay, what do I want to do with my life at that point? And I quite enjoyed environmental consultancy, but it wasn't a particularly sort of commercially compelling field. And I was looking around for the next thing to get into, and I saw an interview with a guy called Shai Agassi at the end of 2010, and he made a really compelling case for electric vehicles. And I thought that could be perfect, sort of a bit of the physics background, a lot of the stuff I'd done, sort of bid writing for the public sector at that time was highly relevant. So I looked at a couple of firms who were in that space, and Pod Point was the one that really appealed to me, and mercifully they offered me a job, and I went and joined Pod Point in the early days. So I think there were 8 of us in the office when I joined. I would say that it was kind of, we were weirdos at that point, right? So electric vehicles are kind of a thing now, or people recognise they're going to be very much a very mainstream thing. Back then it was a bit like a failed Dragon's Den pitch. We'd rock up to council offices carrying charge points in suits.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So you're just literally lugging a charge point up the stairs in a suit, tie going everywhere. Because if you physically had one, you were way ahead of the competition. You were showing renderings. So that was kind of the deal there. Since then, obviously, the industry's completely changed. So what I've had to do at Pod Point's changed over that time, and always kept me kind of interested. And the bit of my work, I do several bits, but I started writing consultation and responses. No one told me to do this. It's just I thought it was worth doing. No one told me to stop. And as a result of that, sort of, I've led our government interaction and industry engagement type stuff at Pod Point, alongside a few comms-y bits as well. That's what I've sort of settled into as a niche, I guess.
Fantastic. I'm actually a big advocate and fan of create your own role. So there's many scenarios in different industries.
Opportunity,
100%. And in my experience actually on that is when you talk to the real niche players, the people who really know what they're doing in specific areas, it's like, well, how'd you get into that? Well, there was a gap. I could fill it, and I really loved filling it, and here I am. Thanks for that background. So maybe we'll start off with relatively easy one, but why EVs? Why a transition to those? And I'm interested to get your view on both from a consumer perspective, but also from a government point of view. So why should a consumer consider moving to EVs, and why should government encourage and support EV adoption?
Those are two very different questions, and they're two very good questions. So ultimately, if you can't convince the consumer, the government's not going to be able to make you do this anyway. So let's start with the consumer, and why do I think EVs are going to win? Right, I think that's the most important question to begin with, and that's because they're better cars. They're better cars to drive. They're faster. They're more powerful. They're much more convenient to own. Now that sounds really weird when you're coming from a petrol car and you realise how quickly you can refuel it, and then you go to an electric car, and the first question is always, well, how long does it take to charge, right? We can go deep on this now in terms of the way to conceptualise this, but maybe the quickest way to say this is, when you get into an electric car, the first sort of realization that dawns on an EV driver that has never occurred to a petrol driver in their life is that their car continues to exist when they aren't driving it. And in fact, your car isn't being driven for 95% plus of its life. And wouldn't it be amazing if the car fueled itself when you weren't trying to drive it, instead of having to periodically take it places to put the energy into it? And that is a level of convenience. So if you've got a charger at home, the level of convenience of just going out to your car and it's full every morning versus going to petrol stations, which is a horrendous consumer experience, is crazy good. So, right, you've got a far more convenient experience and you have a far better product. That is why consumers are going to switch to this en masse. Why haven't they done so far? Because it's more expensive. So the access to this is only more affluent people have got access to this at the moment, really. There are challenges on getting access to charging infrastructure for some as well, and I do accept that. But when you've got decent access to charging infrastructure and the price makes sense, these are better products. And that is why the consumer wants to get into electric cars. I just want to drive a better car. So why do governments want to encourage it? I mean, governments, I guess, don't particularly care whether or not... Sorry, Ian.
And sorry, just quickly, because there was a couple of really interesting things there. One, I forget the percentage exactly, but you kind of said it's something that continues to exist when you're not driving it. Can you elaborate on that? Because I think that's a really interesting way of viewing it. So, like, and if I understand you, a really great point you just made was, in petrol cars, you get in a car, you need to go to A to B, but you need to stop at C to actually fuel. I mean, the same could be said in some scenarios of EVs, but your point, if I understand correctly, is, well, as it's stationary, why not get the charging or the fueling, let's say, there? Are you able to quickly elaborate on that? Because I think that was a really important point that kind of jumps over.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that's kind of the fundamental. So I always say, if I do inductions to people at Pod Point, I say there are essentially two questions you get asked if you work in the world of EVs and EV charging. The first is, how far do they go? So that's range, like how far can you go on a single charge? It's really important. To me, it's actually physically solved. And the reason it's solved is you can drive for about 5 hours, stop for 20 minutes, drive for another 4 hours. And humans don't want to do any more than that. And if they claim they do, don't look in their footwells in their cars because it'll be disgusting. You physically need to empty at some point as a human. So people will want to have, let's say they want 1,000-mile range cars who don't need it. And petrol cars go further. They've got a higher range. That's absolutely true, but it's a different system. You just don't get that. Anyway, that's range solved. The second question is much more interesting, and that's how long do they take to charge?
Yeah.
And that's a really annoying question because it's not straightforward to answer. I need to know what charger you're on, what car you've got. The implication of the question is, I want a really short time in my answer. I want you to tell me blink and it's done, okay? Because it's coming from that petrol mindset. So then you go, okay, well, let's think you're on a really high power 350 kilowatt charger. Then you can go from 20 to 80%, and you're adding all these qualifiers. And it's that whole thing. If you're explaining, you're losing. Like 10, 15 minutes go from 20 to 80%. You're like, that's not the question I asked you at all. But that's because you've got a ramp at the start. I mean, I know you drive an electric car yourself. You've got a ramp at the start in terms of your power, and it ramps down at the end. So if you go 0 to 100, it takes a very long time to charge on a really high power charger. It take you over an hour.
Yeah.
You don't do that. You want to fill the kind of middle bit to get you going quickly, to give you over 200 miles, etc. More interestingly I think it's the wrong question. I don't think it's that useful. If you actually drive an electric car, the metric that's useful for you when you add different charges, how much range do I get per hour plugged in? And to understand that, I can understand, okay, if I'm out and about in a day and I need to pick stuff up. But there's quite a lot of nuance to get to that point. And even some of the answers, right? So if you're telling me it's about 10 hours to fully charge a Model 3 or Model Y from a home charger, it's not that useful. Like, you're not going to set a timer for 10 hours and watch it and go, okay, in 10 hours I'm going to go.
Yeah.
The range per hour is a more useful metric. But what the real question is, why are people asking it? And that's because it's how they use a petrol car. And the way you use a petrol car is you drive it around, deplete the fuel to almost nothing. Then you go to a fairly ubiquitous petrol station and you wang a whole load of energy in the form of petrol, and you do it incredibly quickly. And people are used to that. They're comfortable with that. It feels like there's flexibility with it, and it's the way they want to operate. So they say, "Oh, can you do that for me in an electric car?" And the answer to that is kind of no. Now, the first thing, sorry, I don't know if you're going to come in there.
Oh, yeah, no, and I think I've got, and as you mentioned, I went to an electric car in 2020, and I think some of those early questions, and I went, oh, well, I figured it out, and da-da-da-da, and you're right, as soon as you start explaining, you kind of lose the interest. So what I found over time is, well, I can get from 10% to 80% in 10 minutes. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
Or something like that. So like the initial amount of, charge you need for everyday use is very quick, but you want it to 99%. Well, then it's got a bit of a curve, as you said, to that charge. Yeah. So the closer you get to 100, the slower it becomes to charge. Do I need to get to 100? No. And to your earlier point...
100%. And you're referring again, I think, to a supercharger, aren't you? So that's a 250 kilowatt Tesla dedicated charger. Most charging won't happen in those locations. But when you're talking, and people ask about charge time, they want the shortest possible. And of course, that is highly relevant in terms of long distance driving, particularly. And for those who use hubs, say once a week or whatever, that is relevant. I think the vast majority of charging is going to happen on lower power chargers, which really charge a consistent rate. So 32 amp is pretty common. So in the UK, single phase, it's 7 kilowatt. I think you might have a single phase grid in Australia as well. So it's 7 kilowatt charging at home, and that's talking about 25 to 30 miles of range an hour. It takes about 10 hours to fully charge your car. Okay, the conceptual sort of getting your head around that thing is so if you drive a petrol car, as I say, outside out of mind, you forget your car exists when you aren't trying to use it. So I have to fit all the refueling into my driving. It's the only option you've ever had. So if you start turning around and say it's going to take a long time to charge, it feels like a bad idea. Doesn't matter who you are as a driver, you perceive your car to be a mobile object, because that's just how you use it. When you're not using it, it's completely out of your mind. Now, the beauty of the electric vehicle is it frees you to use that 95% of its life to put the energy into it when you weren't trying to drive it. And we've already mentioned home charging, but we believe at Pod Point workplace charging is absolutely massive. And in fact, between those two, we think that's the vast majority of all charging that's ever going to happen. You then have the public network as well. We put the public network in the region of about 10% charging in terms of energy, so which is kind of mad, right? So you do 100% refueling on the public network. Obviously, you don't have your own petrol station at work or at home. In EVs, we think it might be about 10. So really quite small. There's a bit of a grey area between work and public, and we split that 10% between destinations, so topping up anywhere else you go. I don't have a home charger. I don't have a work charger at the moment. We've done a lot of our charging at a gym that my wife uses, and then we park in car parks around us. The final proportion, and we estimate about 3%, is the really high power charging that you're referring to, so the supercharger style.
Yeah.
And that sounds mad when you come to this and you think, what? How's that even possible? And then you just have to run this thought experiment. Okay, so go to a lady who's used to driving a petrol car. You say, okay, imagine the ferries come overnight and they put 250 to 300 miles of petrol in your car. So every morning you wake up and there's 250 to 300 miles of petrol in your car. Or they come at work and you leave work with 250 miles to 300 miles of petrol in your car. When are you using a petrol station? And you're like, oh, well, I guess only on the days when I'm driving beyond 250, 300 miles. Now, I appreciate you live in a country where you can do that very easily. You can 10x that if you want
local
to.
shop.
But humans don't tend to. Humans actually tend to live around relatively confined areas. Your life fits within, 50 miles of your house. That's where we, and probably shorter than that, right? So you find you need those chargers three times a year, 4 times a year, something like that. It's just, I'm going to drive down to Cornwall. I'm going up to the north of the country to go on holiday and then I'm coming back, right? So it's that conceptual thing of, hang on a minute, this is much, much, much more convenient. And the thing I find really strange is how little that's sort of penetrated the public's imagination. The public have realised that if you don't have a home charger, this could be a problem. And that's a legitimate concern, right? In the UK, I don't know the Aussie stats. In the UK, 72% of drivers have off-street parking at home. The split on households is about 60% of households have parking, 40% don't. But households don't drive cars, drivers do. If you live in central London, for example, it's a really dumb idea to own a car, and you probably don't have parking. So people without cars are overrepresented in that 60%. So we're nearly 3/4 of people can charge at home. When you add on top of that people who can charge at work, and I suspect it's probably better in Australia because you've got a lot more space and it's easier to have a drive. You get the vast majority of this done between home and work charging, and that's massively, massively convenient. So we deep dived a bit there, Ian, in terms of the consumer and the convenient side of it. Just diving right back out. I
thought we'd start with an easy one. Let's get right in there. But just to recap. Sorry, go ahead.
No, please do. So to recap.
Yeah, so to recap, I think the key point I take from that is the mindset change from driving a petrol car to the electric car gives us somewhat of a hangover in terms of the way things are thought of or the expectations. In reality, when you think it through, some of the expectations are covered because of things like supercharging, or they're actually not needed in reality. I like your thought experiment, you go, well, don't worry about charging during the day. What if ferries just topped out during the night, or when you parked it in a certain location, it just topped up when you got back to it? That's the aha moments. I think the second one, and I don't think we touched on this too much, is the way of thinking about it. Again, you mentioned upfront the cost of these. They're going down, and I think maybe we can touch on that, the cost per capacity, as it were, going down. But just the TCO, or the total cost of ownership, because again, when I first looking into this was one of the aha moments for me. And another key question I always get, well, how much is servicing each year? I'm like, well, there's no servicing, there's no engine. So there's a ton of cost each year that's there's cost out. Then in terms of the electricity cost itself, and this varies region to region, time of day, supplier, service you use, whatever. So there's some variance, but generally you can find, I think even globally, generally a third of the price of petrol, and petrol can be quite volatile. So again, the cost there. So again, the total cost of ownership, I found once you just plug a few numbers, you kind of like, oh wow, there's actually a ton of cost out versus a petrol, let's say. I think you touched on some of that, but we didn't quite jump into there. But just on that piece of those sorts of metrics, and again, because you mentioned the cost, and we know emerging EV manufacturers and even Tesla's talking about a new model which is a lot more friendly on the purse, as it were. Can you talk a bit about that, the trend of costs over time? And I think a metric you called out was previously cost per capacity going down.
Yeah, so your battery capacity in terms of units, energy stored, 100%. Everything you said is absolutely right, and the total cost of ownership piece is a nuanced one, and it's actually one in the UK that's got a lot. The case has got weaker, and one of the things for that is the Ukraine war. So we are very dependent on gas. So you mentioned that petrol prices are volatile, and they are. We've seen massive volatility in the gas market, which has really impacted the cost of electricity in the UK particularly, but other European nations as well. And that is one of the reasons that we've got a little bit of a plateau in terms of EV uptake at the moment. It was a slam dunk for a long time. This had a lot of fallout. But let's go back to the fundamentals, or what goes into a total cost of ownership. So the first thing is the cost of the vehicle. So if you've got a really expensive vehicle or a really cheap vehicle, that's going to have probably the biggest impact in terms of your total cost of ownership. And at the moment, when we look at an EV, we are a more expensive vehicle than a petrol equivalent. Now, the reason for that is the cost of the battery, because you mentioned very nicely that, well, there isn't really servicing mode, there's no engine. An EV has about 100 times fewer moving parts in its drivetrain than a petrol car does. The internal combustion engine is an absolute miracle of engineering, which has overcome staggering problems in the idea that I'm basically using explosive to make a whole load of pistons fire, and I've got to enclose it and do this, and I've got to lubricate. It's unbelievable what has been achieved by engineering with an internal combustion engine car. When an internal combustion engine itself, it's just so inefficient. It's so complicated. There are so many bits which wear out, versus an electric motor where there isn't even any metal on metal. You've got magnets floating in coils, right, that spin, and they go forward and they go back. So you drive it forward, and then you put run that motor backwards, and you start being charged back into your battery. That's regenerative braking. It's really basic, and then that just plugs into a battery essentially. So your drivetrain is phenomenally basic. So, well, hang on, how come the car, which has all these components, cameras and blah blah blah, how is that being much less expensive? And of course, we've done a century plus of driving cost out of that supply chain for internal combustion engines. But the battery is the big expensive bit of an EV. Okay, and that's where the cost comes from. Now, if we go back to 2010, so just before I started in this industry, the cost per kilowatt hour capacity of the battery, so that was about $1,000. So $1,000 per kilowatt hour. So typical full battery electric vehicle at the moment has, say, a 70 to 80 kilowatt hour battery, maybe 60, something like that. The biggest one is like the Mercedes thing, which I think is a EQS, which is like 115. A few of the big Teslas are 100 kilowatt hour. If you've got $1,000 to manufacture every single one of those, take a 100 kilowatt hour battery. That's $100,000 just to make the battery, right? That car is going to be really, really expensive. What we've seen is an absolutely superb drop in the cost to manufacture batteries since then. I can't remember the exact number. We're in the region of about $130 per kilowatt hour average at the moment now, from $1,000 in 2010. And actually, in the last 2 years prior to this year, we'd seen it stall and go up, and that was a result of a spike in commodity prices, particularly lithium, and a couple of others.
But the prices dramatically dropped over the last 10 years.
Dramatically, yeah. So you get a real kind of S-curve drop. Through the pandemic, that flattened and then went slightly up recently, and then last year went down again 14%. And the reason it managed to flatten despite commodity prices going up is we're driving economies of scale as we make more and more and more. I want to say we, largely China, China incredibly well embedded in the supply chain for this.
Yeah.
We're getting cost out of this all the time. Then a whole load of the base metal prices went up, and that flattened it and went up a bit. Those prices have come back down again. So you can go look up the wholesale price of lithium and nickel and whatever else is in these things. They've come back down again, and now we're starting to see these costs come down. That, once it gets to about $100 per kilowatt hour, and Bloomberg New Energy Finance are probably the leading authority on where the prices are. They're projecting about 2026 is when that's going to happen. So I talked to you not far off 18 months from where we are. That is the point where it becomes about the same cost to manufacture a petrol car versus an electric car. And you can quickly run the thought experiment. Okay, and it's going to continue, right? So by the time we get to the 2030s, it's going to be cheaper to make an EV than an equivalent petrol car. So at the moment, a lot of the pushback is, are you rich people forcing your, in the UK, net zero agenda on poor people who have to get these cars that they'll never afford, and it's all a disaster, yada, yada, yada. Well, hang on a minute. What if this was the cheaper option? Because it will be. So even up front for the hardware, these are going to be cheaper. We then come on to the running costs as well, and the running costs are lower because servicing requirements are low. I mean, you can see cars which have done 300,000 miles, 400,000 miles, really with nothing changed but tyres and the occasional wiper blade. You don't even need to change your brake pads because almost all the braking is done through regenerative braking, just running the motors backwards. And again, no metal on metal wear in there.
Yeah.
And you'd have to do that in an internal combustion engine car. The amount of bits you need to change to get through 300,000 miles. It's like tens of thousands of pounds or dollars or whatever you're in.
Yeah. So the runner cost, the durability. Yeah,
exactly. And then you've got the cost of electricity, etc. So we're coming to something where this becomes incredibly compelling. You're quite soon going to go, right, I could get the electric car, which outperforms the petrol car like you wouldn't believe. I mean, like, you're familiar with this, right? But everyone who gets in an EV the first time and puts their foot out, like, bloody hell. Like, what? Wow. Even quite tame ones. Your 0 to 40 is like, just goes, right? It's great fun. So you've got the track is where the internal combustion is winning for the longer races at the minute. So on endurance, petrol beats it, but on outright performance, I mean, EV just crushes internal combustion engines. Right. It's not a competition, right? And so in terms of road driving, you really don't want to go a lot faster, like 70 miles an hour. You get in real trouble if you do that. Now, I remember seeing a Top Gear episode where someone was doing drag races in like a Tesla Performance Model S versus some sort of Porsche. He really upset himself because he could never win in the Porsche. I mean, it wasn't close. And then he goes, I've cracked it. The Porsche is much quicker once you're over 120. So I'm not... This is a road car, mate. Yeah. The only thing I'm doing if I'm at 120 is decelerating as quickly as I can because I don't want to go to prison. Like, it's just not relevant. Anyway, so it's a road car. It's a ton better to drive. It's just way more fun. If you've got an argument against that, I will tell you that it's just pure nostalgia. Oh, but I like this, I like that about my car. Wicked. Fred did, and I love steam engines to the day he died, right? Everyone else had moved on to like petrol cars. The same thing is true. Oh, I like throaty exhaust noise, and that appeals to me too. I'm old, right? But it's the roar of obsolescence. This shit is better. Anyway, so that's the car is better. It's going to be cheap.
So I'm just laughing because because this is question 1 part A, and I thought I chose an easy one. We're getting
through quite a lot.
Warmed up.
No worries. Right. So 1A. Right. So you just fast forward this. Think of this in like 2030. The car is cheap to make, it's cheaper to buy, it's cheaper to run, and it outperforms the other car. It's going to be really weird to go and buy a petrol car. It's like, well, why are you doing that? I just love losing money for worse products. And so everyone fighting this at the moment is fighting it on historic information. Oh, it's more expensive. Yeah, 100%. It is. These are more expensive today. But you've got to look at the underlying trends because that is going to go very soon. And then you get serious uptake. So at the moment, a lot of this is driven by, affluent people who can afford it, who find these things exciting and want to do it. And people who are driven by the environmental agenda. We haven't even mentioned that yet. We'll come to that on the government side. And and people who are making the most tax incentives. So there's really good tax incentives for company cars in the UK. Those are the things which are driving the early market. And I will totally agree that those aren't sustainable, right? If you're going to go mass market, but the whole reason that we're going to go mass market is this can become more affordable than the petrol car. And at that point, you flip this. This is game over. And we've got one market in the world where we've seen that happen, and that's Norway. So Norway is a very odd country. It's filthy rich. There's only 7 Norwegians in it. They've got all the money in the world from oil. And they have a very strange system where they just tax the hell out of everything, and everyone's very wealthy. It's kind of a weird thing. They've got sovereign wealth fund. What they did with EVs, because if you want to be unkind, you say it's pure guilt. They encourage EV uptake because they're filthy rich off selling hydrocarbons out the North Sea. They said, okay, well, we'll just waive the taxes, which basically gave you price parity from the early 2010s.
Day one,
right?
Yeah, right.
And they've driven up to 90% of all cars sold in Norway are full battery electric now. It's just taken over. It's absolutely taken over. Wow. And it's really, Norwegians are not, they're just people like you and me, and they're just making sort of sensible decisions on what works. And they're like, well, these are better. Yeah. And they cost me less. That's going to be where we're going for everything, and that's what makes me very, very excited. It's the consumer who will drive this because it's a better product and it's cheap. Done.
So I think just to summarise, I know that's all of our time. Well, so first I think we spoke about so like people look at the price tag of the car, and I think a key point there is, and I know there's nuances, regions, times, etc., but the total cost of ownership over time, do the maths, it makes more sense. They're better cars, better performance, the durability, etc. And what was I forgot the other key point that the cost is actually even going down further. So the convenience factor, but the cost is going down. So again, right now, even with the TCO, there's still an upfront cost, but to your point, in the next 2 years, fast forward to 2030, it's going to be way cheaper than gas cars.
Spot on.
And I think one of the again, another kind of objection, let's say, is the grid, the infrastructure to charge these. Well, this is the groundwork put in now, and I think you kind of alluded to the experience for some people. Some people don't have a place to charge at home; they're on street parking, etc., etc. And I think my experience is the same. Like in the early days, there was like one local place to go. Then it got kind of busy. Then there were all of a sudden 1,000 places to charge, fast chargers, slow chargers. I like the slow chargers because they're for free. So I just plug it in and it's just, great. It's free, free charging. So, so I think those are the key. All right. Question 1.B. Governments. Governments. Let's keep it to 5 minutes max. What all seriousness, what are the key, why incentivize? And I think me doing research in this area, I think the carbon footprint, key call out, stabilizing grids, and energy security. I think like conflicts around gas and that sort of stuff. So I think those 3 areas I was interested to kind of explore, but please add in more. The
first one is absolutely carbon emissions. Okay, so it's really difficult to argue that carbon isn't causing an increase in world temperatures. It amuses me that we have a lot of people who want to try. They don't do a very good job of this. I've never seen anyone make a compelling argument. You can find lots of interesting, there's a lot of nuance in what happens as a result of high carbon dioxide levels. But if you track global temperatures, there's this really weird way they start going up post-industrial revolution, and it seems to track exactly the amount of CO2 we're putting into the air. And we can do
outside of... Yeah, and I mean, there's this whole political debate around warming and all that sort of stuff. Outside of that, just the health of humans. So breathing in exhaust fumes.
That's air quality. The thing is, air quality issues aren't really an existential threat because we put like catalytic converters into stuff. Now, urban air quality isn't great. This is a political debate. It is something you want to fix. It's not a global existential threat to humanity in the way that melting all the polar ice caps raises the sea level a pretty phenomenal amount. Biodiversity issues, habitat loss, destruction of agriculture entirely. These are the doom and gloom kind of scenarios, and I'm not fond of doom and gloom on this. I think it's counterproductive to be like overly miserable about all these things, because I'm more of a tech optimist on this. I don't like people who just say, "Oh, it's all rubbish," and we're never going to fix it. So we've got to send the peasants back to the fields and live like we'll all subside out of our own gardens. No humans are ever going to do that. And I really do believe if you can change the incentives in the right way, we can put a dent in global warming and through reducing CO2 emissions, etc. So if we're going to do that, I think you need technical solutions, and EVs are just one of those. Now, the first thing to say about EVs is you have to kind of understand what they are and what they aren't. So they are in terms of CO2, they're a much lower emitting technology, and they really are. So people will challenge this. I mean, if you've got a calculator on the internet, you can go and work this stuff out. It's not that difficult, but it's a really good way of addressing a very major emission source. Passenger vehicles particularly, but all road transport is a massive factor in global emissions. It's the biggest factor in UK emissions. They aren't an absolute panacea. You've still got a lot of sort of industrial processes to make EVs, and if you don't decarbonise your grid as well, you've still got a lot of residual emissions in there. I mean, you can charge an EV off quite a dirty grid and still be a lot more, or have a lot lower emissions than you do from an internal combustion engine vehicle. Just to put this in an interesting way, the CO2 required to drive, required to generate the electricity to drive a car a mile, say, in the UK, is about the same as the CO2 emissions to produce petrol to drive it the same way. Not burn, produce.
Right.
So to actually make petrol to drive you that far, you've got as many CO2 emissions just to make the petrol as you do to actually drive the EV along. Okay, so one of the things that people don't realise is how bad petrol is in terms of its supply chain, which is kind of mad. Obvious it's bad, but it's about 30%. So if you look at your tailpipe emissions on a petrol car, add 30% just to make it. No one ever thinks about that. So, oh yeah, your EV, that's charged off the grid and that electricity isn't 100% clean. Yeah, cool. How do they make your petrol? No one ever makes that comparison.
Right.
But yeah, so they are much, much better on CO2. Not an environmental panacea, but what they do is they give you the opportunity to use clean energy sources to drive cars, and that's the big win. And that's the real reason government are into it. Yeah, well, I'll definitely take the urban air quality benefits as well. Well, why wouldn't you? That's a huge advantage as well. They have a certain impact in terms of road surface abrasion, and they can make in some will argue they make slightly more particulate. But if really the only thing you're emitting is road surface, and we can look at the way we make and tyres, we can look at the way we make both those two surfaces and say, okay, well, we need to have ones that don't break up in a way that makes those of PM 2.5 and PM 10 and all that kind of stuff. Really, the global argument for EV is the CO2 issue, and that's why governments are on board with this. Now, the next thing you said is they give you opportunities to stabilise the grid. Yes, they do. But the first thing they do is they present you with a challenge, because you've got to get a whole load of energy through your grid now, or a whole load more energy through your grid, because you're now running the cars off it where you weren't before. So they are both a challenge and an opportunity to your grid. And you're absolutely right. As we start to decarbonise our grids, we're looking to use more renewables. And yeah, this is a big political debate as well. I'm quite pro-nuclear, but renewables, if you get the system right, it can be a very, very inexpensive way of generating electricity. One of the lovely things about electric vehicles is the massive flexibility in the way they absorb energy. So most people charge at home most of the time. We predict in the fullness of time about 60% of all charging is likely to happen at home. Today it's about 80%. And that's because people who can charge at home are earlier into this market. So even when everyone is driving this, we still think the majority happens at home. Imagine the fairly typical way a car gets used at home. People drive home at 7 o'clock, or they're home by 7 o'clock, they plug in, and they leave at like 8 o'clock the next morning. On our stats at Pod Point, people charge on average every third day. And if we look at a new car in the a new EV, I like to use a proxy of about an average of 28 miles a day of range in an EV, because the average car in the UK drives 21 miles, but EVs drive further than petrol cars because it's cheaper to do the driving, it's more enjoyable to do the driving, and they're usually new cars. The 21 is averaged over everything, including all the old ones. 28 miles of range is an hour of charging on a typical 7 kilowatt charger, and they do it every third day. So you're looking at 3 hours of charging being to take place every third day in a 13-hour period. Now imagine you've got a grid which, when you no longer talk just about times of high demand, because everyone is taking power in the early evening window, we now have times of high supply. It gets really windy, it gets less windy, etc. And if you have things which are plugged in for 3 hours in a 13-hour window, it starts to give you real opportunities on when you take that electricity. And it gives you opportunities to absorb more. So, okay, well, do not charge now. Charge when the wind picks up at 4 a.m., wherever it might be. And there is some cash benefit to you, consumer. And at Pod Point, that is the most exciting thing we're looking at the moment is delving into flexibility markets. How do we use this big network? We've got hundreds of thousands of chargers. How do we start to move the way people charge around, offering that to protect the grid so we don't overstretch it when it's under strain? And how do we make use of when it's windy and we're not using all the stuff coming out of our wind farms, etc.? So you're absolutely right. The first thing EVs present are, we're going to have to generate quite a lot more electricity, which is a challenge. But on the other hand, if your electricity grid is moving towards a more flexible world, actually they provide you with really exciting opportunity as well. And the one thing to mention on the scale of the challenge, National Grid here, they had a lovely stat that if you electrify all road transport in terms of energy, you'll push grid demand to levels not seen since like 2002, 2003. So if you imagine the amount of demand on the grid grew up to 2002, 2003, and then it peaked, and it's been falling ever since. And the reason for that is ever more efficient appliances. We just don't need as much electricity as we used to. So if you electrify absolutely everything, go, sorry, 10% more. Fine.
And that's the UK. So I think this will be different. Yeah. Because also I think an interesting thing I've been learning about is, the US is an interesting one, or any grids really, to manage, maintain, upgrade grids, incredibly expensive. And I think utilities are being tasked with that, even from a regulatory perspective, to spend to reinvigorate and modernize the grid, let's say. Huge investment, lots and lots of money. So what are the costs? Very, very high. But the cost of producing electricity is trending to zero. It's becoming cheaper and cheaper to actually produce energy. So the grid is the interesting one. So it sounds like in the UK, not so much of a problem because, efficiencies of appliances and everything that's consumed just actually getting more efficient. But I'm interested also to... Sorry?
I think that's a slight oversimplification. So the what I've just given you
I'm trying to simplify. No.
Yeah. 1B. Come on, we're going.
1B. Give it. Come on.
I've given you the National Grid version, and obviously I'm in the UK. We've been UK based largely so far, so I know our system reasonably well. National Grid look after the transmission system, which is right up the top. Right, it's the big ugly pylons which run down the side of our motorways. They slosh energy around a level that EVs doesn't threaten them. Knock it out there. Love it. As you go down the system, you get into more trouble. So the transmission system goes down into the distribution network operators. Those guys, they're the ones who run the cables to your homes and your businesses. And their whole networks are based on an assumption of how much power each home takes. And this is, as you know, as a physicist,
that's the
distinction between energy and power. So energy, fine. Power.
Don't test me right now, but I know.
Yeah. Don't have to, because I just know you know. You got a high 2-1. You're welcome. The cables going out of our homes and businesses, running to local transformers. That network is built on an assumption of how much power a home takes. In the UK, we're driving everyone to electrify their heating and their car. And the likelihood is that
so then
might
demand
double.
on a local,
Yes,
so the demand on the local
that.
level, right?
Yeah,
right, gotcha.
And you're talking about the grid. So that's the substations that are split around a town. There's a bunch of substations which run up to bigger substations, which go and join the transmission network. Those are at risk, and those guys are nervous, and they're the ones running around in the UK going, "Ooh." But at the same time, we're going around and saying, well, we don't have to charge these cars when your network's under strain. We can move them, and it saves you a ton of money. So again, we're presenting a problem, but we're also potentially offering a solution or at least help. And that's a very interesting one in the UK because they're all regulated monopolies, and their sales teams are looking at this and going, I can do anything I want. All I have to do is give you voltage at every home at the level that you're between certain bounds. And anything I spend, I put on the customer. I have to do it. I put it on the customer. So they're like, yeah, beautiful. We can build our network.
So they
bigger.
pass it on
to
the consumer. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Whereas their innovation teams and the government say, for God's sake, no, you're going to use all the flexibility you can. You are not going to go and build this massive network. You're going to make sure you manage it out. So there's an interesting little sort of Chinese wall going on. Sorry, Ian.
Go. No, that's great. And so I will dumb it down and I will simplify it. So do forgive me. But I think if I understand your point, and that was that's actually a really good point. So from a grid levels, a high level, grid level, we're fine. But when you get down to the local levels, that's where they're designed to supply power at the average consumption rate. But those consumption rates at the local level, like the house level, they're increasing because everything's moving electric. So that's the nuance. And and I'm not sure how much we want to get into microgrids because, I mean, if you think about, like you hear a lot about solar panels and solar energy. Anyone in UK laughs because it just constantly rains there all the time. So I understand that, UK citizens may be,
You've
not
been
that
in a long
interested.
time,
But
mate.
here,
It's global warming. It's basically Dubai. Yeah, no, sorry.
Okay. But here in Australia, it's a great thing. But no, so as more and more people are actually becoming self-sufficient, self-contained, solar, batteries, that sort of stuff, a microgrid of one house or four houses or a pod of houses, etc. So where they can be a bit more self-sustainable, not so much a drain on the grid. That becomes a really interesting scenario. But to your point, and I think that, and maybe we'll get into this now, like and going to your organization, Pod Point, what if we were to cleverly time when people do and don't charge, so there's not so much a burden, that saves you a ton of money. We can pass on value, credits, loyalty, whatever the case may be to the customer. That's really interesting. That's kind of you solving a problem for the grid. And is there, is this a good time to get into like V2X and, vehicle charging and actually taking back from vehicles to help the grid stabilize? Or I don't know, can you speak a little bit about what V2X is and how that can help in the future stabilize grids?
100%. So microgrids, a concept which is a little bit blurry on what is a microgrid and what isn't. A microgrid probably is still connected to the larger grid, right? It's just elements of it are kind of self-contained. The hub and spoke generation model. So you've got big generating assets pushing electrons down cables, which is what we have today. That's a conventional model. Is potentially under threat from the concept of particularly solar and storage, as you mentioned, and we even do that in the UK. That is the most kind of conventional microgrid thing that we're starting to see have a big impact, and we really, I think everyone sees the potential of that. The cost coming out of solar is incredible, and so the storage, of course, are batteries. The slightly different batteries to the ones going in cars. They have very different performance requirements, but the supply chains are broadly the same. So solar and storage, the cost of those are coming right down, and that's hugely exciting. Going to the car side, so V2X, essentially, this is about bidirectional charging. So you, at the moment, conventionally put electricity into the car battery. The car goes around, is a car, discharges, comes back, you put more in. Bidirectional charging is, well, hang on a minute, we've got all these cars sat there with this enormous amount of stored energy. Can we not tap it? can we not get it back out when the grid is really, there's no wind, demand's really high, it's night, whatever it is? And of course, that's a really, really compelling and interesting idea. So if we're going to go out of the vehicle, the first thing you do is you have V to L, so vehicle to load. And we're starting to see that quite often. Some Hyundais have it, the Cybertruck has it, etc., etc. That is, you can power appliances from your car. Although there's a socket physically in the car, so you can run stuff off of it. That's really useful in, say, a power cut. That's a very, very kind of basic way of doing it. Then you have V to H, which is vehicle to home. So, okay, well, I can take power out, potentially through a dedicated bidirectional charger that can then run elements of my home. Now, that's a bit more complicated on the charger side, and I'll come to the charger in a second, but can be done. Then you move to V to G, which is what you'll hear quite a lot, which is vehicle to grid, which is, okay, can we get the energy out of the batteries and put it back onto the grid and run the grid on stored EV batteries? That is also possible, but each step you get more complicated. And once you move to vehicle to grid, you need to get export licenses. You have to, it becomes increasingly complex as you go. All these are very, very interesting. Now, Pod Point's vision is that, technically,
or?
Yes, we'll come on to the technical side in a second. The regulatory side is a pain. Sorting G licenses, as they're known in the UK, and I forget the numbers, like G50, whatever, are a bit annoying.
Because you mentioned license here.
Yeah, exactly. There is a technical aspect on this as well. The first thing to say is, before you even start taking power out of a car, we have smart charging and demand-side response, and that's the stuff that we're already doing at Pod Point. So let's say, I want to get 5 kilowatt back onto the grid because for whatever reason, the demand is too high. Now, you can have a vehicle-to-grid system which gets that out of a car battery, which is quite a relatively complicated way to do it. Or I can find 5 cars charging the local area and take a kilowatt out of each of them.
Yeah, right.
And the net is the same, but the smart charging one is as easy as it comes. So just send 5 software requests. And if it's only a kilowatt and I know that car's plugged in for another 12 hours, fine, not a problem. So that's...
So how does that work for the consumer? Like, as I'm charging, do I get a little notification saying, hey, you're right if we take 1 kilowatt back and credit you? Or like, how does that... What's the consumer experience?
It depends on the system, but essentially you may well opt in and say, so long as my car is fully charged for this period, knock yourselves out.
Right. Okay.
And
yeah.
before this, you get certain rewards. So that you're going to get every time? Probably not. And what you are likely to say is, if tonight you need to fully charge your car and you don't want to be interrupted, press that button. Now, you won't get your rewards, but your car will fully charge. That's generally how.
Yeah.
So we love that because we can do that today. And our charging network is built in a way to deliver those kind of benefits. And it's started to become real for us in the last year or so. We're starting to see genuine...
When you say real...
money
like
comes
so
back
revenue stream. Yeah, right.
And goes out to our consumers as well. We've talked about it a long time, but now we actually do it. And that's very, very exciting. Let's go back to the V2X thing. So technically, car batteries charge at DC. If we rapid charge them, we rapid charge them through DC as well. And those are big sort of, more powerful things. Your supercharger, etc., is a DC charger. And we charge at home, we use an AC charger because our home electricity is AC. That AC runs into the car and there's an inverter which changes it to DC and puts it into the battery. Now, getting energy out of the car, the way people look to do V2G to begin with was, let's get DC out. So I don't have to run an inverter on the car side, it goes straight out. The problem with that is then you need to put an inverter on the charger, which changes AC to DC. So it goes into your car and absorbs DC on the way out and converts it to AC, which can go back to your house, etc. That makes your charger really expensive compared to a normal charger. Thousands of pounds more expensive to install. And once you're thousands of pounds more expensive, you're really undermining your business case to do it in the first place. What we're starting to see is car companies say, maybe we should have a bidirectional inverter or an inverter which is changing DC out of the battery and making it so AC goes out. That makes your car more expensive. So you can see reasons why you wouldn't want to do that, particularly early on when the batteries are very expensive, etc. As those battery costs come down, we may well see more people fitting that inverter. Now that means you can get AC out very inexpensively. And that starts to become much, much more compelling. We aren't really there yet. We're starting to see the first sort of forays into it. And that's when vehicle to grid shows real potential, because the inherent potential in it is obvious, like this massive virtual battery of all these cars. Why can't we just get the energy out of it? But that DC home charging, bidirectional charger is so expensive that it's like, I can't. I remember someone did some sums on this a few years ago, and it's probably out of date. Someone like a firm called Element Energy. And they said, right, well, we've looked at this, and we think the maximum anyone could ever make from a car would be £400 a year doing V2G. But that was if the car never moved. And that makes it a very poor investment as a car. And they thought, well, more realistically, the car will move. And then it's only £100. And one of the reasons for that is cars are often moving in the early evening window when you really want the flexibility, because they're coming home, etc., which is really annoying. So if you're only getting £100 a year and it's costing you thousands of pounds extra to put the installation, you can quickly realise this is duff, right? There's no commercial case here. You can't have a 20-year payback. And that's been the real blocker on this. If we can get round that, then you can start to kind of really make some interesting cases. But the two things which are slightly undermining the case for V2G is the smart charging thing, because you don't need anything at all, and it's really, really easy to do compared to V2X. And the other one is home storage batteries, because they are always there, and they can do whatever you want. They can play in every market we're talking about in terms of flexibility, and they don't leave and go to work. They're there online all the time. And that's a hugely, hugely interesting place at the moment, where that value is going to come out of it is undeniable. It's obvious. Which of the technologies which are going to win in which circumstances is all to play for, and that's hugely exciting.
Right, but if I understood what you said correctly, a lot of this is now all coming together because the prices, the efficiencies of producing them are all coming down at a dramatic rate.
And they're scaling out. So the availability of this resource gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah, a lot of these things are now starting to become real. We've seen them coming, but they are really starting to become real now.
Yeah, right. So it really seems like a tipping point for not just EVs, but the charging infrastructure, home batteries, storage, etc. Yeah,
exactly right.
Exciting time. Must be a really exciting time in the industry.
It isn't it? Because of the plateau in EV sales, it has actually been a really, really tough time in the industry. So we've gone through a lot of changes at Pod Point recently. Our founder, CEO, was moved on in the middle of last year. So it's been very, very tough. And a lot of the businesses had scaled for the kind of growth we saw through 2021, 2022. And then with uptake slightly plateauing. So you're talking about moving from early adopters to early majority at a time when electricity costs got really high. The falling cost of batteries has slowed a bit. The commercial case got weaker. The economic case for an EV got weaker. So in some ways, it's been a very, very tough time. But like you say, actually below the hood, the stuff going on is hugely exciting. And even if we look at the fundamentals which are driving EV uptake, which really is battery cost, right? That is the thing that underpins everything. What's happening in that market is like, oh, this is going to be incredible. You've got so many battery factories coming online that the Chinese government are like, we might actually have to slow this down. We might be over capacity here. This stuff might get too cheap. At the same time, we've got a political debate in the UK saying, are EVs going to happen? They're all just too expensive. And you're like, you might be a little bit, you might want to pay attention to what's happening in the world.
I'm getting the same feeling from our conversation. I'm like, things are looking great. And you're like, well, no. Because But under the doom and gloom is actually something really awesome happening.
Exactly right. So
that is such a strange...
right. Exactly. Yeah, so if you look at a lot of the firms in the industry are having a tough time, charging infrastructure firms, there's a startup called Arrival, which made vans, or reported to make vans, that went under recently after being like a really exciting thing, had a big order off Amazon. So there's some struggles this industry is going through. Yeah, if you know what the underlying trends are underneath, that's basically going to deliver what we're doing, those never look more exciting.
Wow. So as a business, it's like we're in a period where we just need to survive for now. We need to make sure we're operationally, physically fit, let's say, and survive this. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So we need to survive this hurricane that's happening through various political and economic trends, but under the hood, we're ready to go when things kick off again.
How beautifully summarised, Ian. Very good.
Oh, thank you. I try my best. And I've been following you for a little while, so I've been trying in the background boil this down. So. We've covered a lot. And I think we've touched on a whole bunch of my other questions. So, but I actually did want to. Yeah, so thanks. It's 59 minutes, so that's question 1. Let's look at question 2 now. Well, actually, I'm gonna sidestep here because my uncle and I, my uncle, a guy named Peter, he's a fantastic person. So if Peter's listening to this, I love you very much. I'm a better person because of you.
Is there a butt covering him?
Oh, no. But he so we talk about this sort of stuff, and he's an engineer. So, we talk and debate around these sorts of areas and stuff. And I said I was having a conversation with you. What sort of questions, should I ask? What does he think? And I got these series of text messages, which were fantastic. Cool. I'm just going to read these out. And I think we may have covered some of them, but if anything, I'm going to test your objection handling skills, let's say.
I just get really angry and flounce off. Yeah, no, carry on.
Yeah. Mr. Electricity Dude, answer this. No, I'm joking.
Yeah.
I'm an engineer. I like numbers. Can he provide numbers to convince me that the grid, as it exists, can carry the load for vehicles and everything else if we phase out fossil fuels? If not, what will it take? What will the cost be? And how long will it take? The UK is a small island. Bloody Canadian. Does he have info on North America? I have concerns about the 800-kilometer drive, which I think we've touched on, which is not uncommon for me. How many charges will I need, and how long does each charge take? I think we touched on that. What is the cost for electricity per kilometer driven? I can buy 3.8 liters of gas for $3 US and drive for 20 miles. That's 15 cents per mile, or 9 cents per kilometer. What is the corresponding metric for EV? The tank of gas will take me 600 kilometers. What does EV charge compare to that? What does an EV charge compare to that? How long would it take to build the charging system in the UK, in North America? This is my favorite part. No foo-foo answers. I want numbers. As a non-EV owner, I perceive an agenda to pressure governments to mandate EVs prematurely before the grid is ready to create a crisis that could otherwise be avoided. There seems to be a belief that without a crisis, there will never be a volunteer to spend money to build the grid requirements. So there was a lot there.
Yeah, that's about 18 questions.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna I'm not gonna just throw that at you and say, all right, go for it. But I think just distilling some of those points down, I think we've actually covered some of them. But just again, to test your objection handling skills here, cost per mile.
Yeah, sure. So, as he says, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with costs per kilowatt hour in Canada. So I'll have to run UK numbers. So typically, you're looking about 15. Average car does 15 pence per mile, something like that. In terms of petrol, if we on cheap rates, you get somewhere in the region of 7p per kilowatt hour. It's the cheapest you can do on, if we're not talking about self-generated solar, which is another issue. Overnight tariff is somewhere in the region of 7p per kilowatt hour. Kilowatt hour is 3.5 miles, so you're looking at 2p a mile versus
2p
15, so 7.5 times cheaper. Now, but that's
7.5 times cheaper.
Yeah, but then when we go go out to the public network at the moment, because of various issues with how much electricity has gone up in the UK, particularly since the Ukraine war.
You couldn't just pause there, could you? You couldn't just say,
we want to be fair.
7 times and move on. No.
Yeah, so we
well,
see
there's a war going on, and
well,
fair enough.
There is, but the costs have gone up a lot and have made that less compelling. So, public charging is quite expensive in the UK at the moment. So there are definitely public charges where it's more expensive than petrol. And that's typically the really
worst case scenario.
About 90p.
Yeah, what's the worst case scenario?
90p per kilowatt hour. Yeah, so you're looking really, I think break even is around 60 to 70p per kilowatt hour is where you're threatening the cost of petrol. And obviously we're talking about a total cost of ownership. That's a problem because your car's probably more expensive. Home charging, if you don't do a time use tariff, is in the region of 30p a kilowatt hour, so half that. So if you've got a really cheap rate, it's like way cheaper. And why wouldn't you? We see those tariffs are incredibly popular. A normal charge at home is half the price of petrol, etc. And I imagine those are more or less the same in North America too, both US and Canada. We load a lot of our tax revenue onto fuel duty in the UK. And I don't think they do quite as much in Canada and the US, so that makes the commercial case less compelling, I think, over there. But I need to run the numbers. I don't know. These are foo-foo answers. I'm really sorry to your uncle. I just don't have the numbers at hand. Just on his thing, can we run it on the grid today? So 100% uptake of it? No, you couldn't. But that's kind of mad. Like no one's going to arrive and go, well, here are all the EVs. We've crushed all your other cars overnight. Like, this is a transition. We can take an awful lot more than you might think using the grid. And I think that the first thing to think about when someone says, how are we going to deploy the charging infrastructure? Get out of the idea of I'm replacing all the petrol stations and into the idea of realising that the charging infrastructure is largely a discrete socket on the wall of your home or your work. You go, That's a very different thing. That's not what I was thinking. I was thinking of massive power hubs. Well, yeah, we need some of that. That's where the flexibility comes.
But to your point, that's a small percentage.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. That's a small percentage over time. And again, as more charges introduced in home and street side and shopping malls, etc., workplaces. Exactly. That's going to be even more so.
Distributes it. And so the more you try and consolidate it into a really high-powered hub, the harder that is. The more you distribute it, the easier it is, because the grid is kind of everywhere.
Yeah. So, okay, so the benefits of distributing that. Yeah. So, and I'm actually going to call out the what Tesla call the destination chargers.
Yes.
That's free charging. And
not in the UK
in our local shopping mall. Oh, really? There's some that's changed here, but there's plenty that I just plug in free electricity because it invites you to that shopping mall. So no brainer.
Yeah, 100%. And we that was big. So that going away in the last 2 years in the UK has been a real problem in terms of the case for EVs. So that's a dynamic that we're dealing with in the UK, which is new and more challenging because you're right. We call them hosts. We used to have like 70% of our network was free to use, say 2 years ago. And virtually none of it is now.
Yeah, right.
And that's because the cost of electricity went up so much. People are scared to do it. But in the long run, I think hopefully those prices levelise. And being a host, putting a charge point in your say hotel, whatever it is, it's so compelling to people to come and use it that they're going to pick you over your competition. And I think that dynamic's really interesting. So because no one wants to put them in themselves, there's been a big rise of people funding them to go in.
Oh, okay.
And that is, that's good that they're doing that, but it means you load cost onto cost onto cost that needs to then go back and pay the investors. And it makes those installations expensive, where I think probably the long term is businesses are going to host this themselves if they want the custom.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of those investments quite risky.
I mean, just anecdotally, when I'm traveling and on the road, I choose. I mean, we went up to Hunter Valley, so wine region, and you choose the wine regions that have a charger. Not that we needed it, but you've got one, great. So plug it in. That's 10%.
Exactly right. Tesla use an analogy that charging should be an amenity, not a service, and we've gone the other way. But yeah.
Well, I've actually it's slightly different in Australia. I've actually noticed that here. It's kind of slowly. I mean, it may change. I mean, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, the long distance drive was the actual. I think we covered this, but
so if your uncle can drive 800 kilometers without stopping, then we need him to offer to share his bladder with medical science, because that's incredible, right? So,
how many stops and how long?
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Humans need to stop, and again. petrol drivers just completely ignore this. Well, of course I stop and get a coffee and a sandwich. I'm a human, right? But I'm only stopping for, I don't know, 15 minutes. Well, you're done then, mate. And now you don't have to drive to the petrol station to put petrol in it. It's doing it while you're using the facility. So, but, as long as you've got the infrastructure out there, and that's a big if, right? We need it in the right places. Then that's not a big issue. Until you are really confident with the infrastructure, long distance driving in large countries is very scary, and particularly in Canada. I mean, if you're ice road trucking to Yellowknife, I'd take some convincing to go for the electric before I'm willing to take that on, and I think that's entirely sensible.
In fact, maybe that's a question there. In what scenarios would you not promote EVs?
Right, well, let's take this a few ways. In the middle of London, cycle. There you are. That's the first one. Like cars.
I thought you were going to go extreme. Like if you live in a mountain and you're chucking.
Yeah, that's what I'll come on to in a second. But the first thing is where most of the journeys happening. They aren't happening on the top of a mountain in the middle of nowhere, are they? Most of them are happening in city centres. And cars are a rubbish transport solution for central London, for example. Cycle. So don't use an EV. That's a really dumb idea. If you have to use an EV, it'd be like an electric taxi. Great, but public transport and walking and cycling are going to kill EVs in terms of CO2 and convenience in the middle of urban centres. So I wouldn't recommend driving.
Where's EV bikes? I've seen a couple of electric bikes. Did you get a lot of those charging?
Yes. So a proportion of the Boris bikes, which you'll be familiar with, now are electric. So in the racks, there's a few with batteries.
Oh, those. No, I mean like not motorbikes, but you know what I mean, like electric.
Yeah, there's electric mopeds coming out. China did a fun thing with those where they banned internal combustion engines in certain regions. I think banned them overnight at some point, maybe a decade ago. Which is the sort of thing you can do if you're the Chinese Communist Party. Just go,
some poor person woke up. I got to go work and I can't drive my car.
Why is it so quiet? Yeah. Exactly. But yeah, so they pushed everything electric, and actually it's the 2 and 3 wheelers which are really putting the dent in global oil demand that have gone that way, which are interesting. But yeah, go back to your other case. Yeah, if I'm in northern Canada doing enormous distances, that's a good example of somewhere I'd be pretty nervous to drive an EV. And if I was in the outback, living in a remote, sort of one of your kind of cattle ranches out in the middle of the Northern Territories, I'm going to take a little bit of convincing. If I've got I can take a load of fuel in tanks on the back of my car, and if it all goes wrong, I'm kind of all right. But if I'm going to be 1,000 miles from civilization, I'm going to be a bit nervous about my 200-mile range EV at that point. It's I think it can be done. I think it's entirely possible they'll go electric in the fullness of time, but I will be nervous.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Oh man, we don't get to catch up enough. I'm finding short, succinct answers very difficult to get through. I really got my work cut out for me to bring this together.
You're asking big questions.
I know. No, this is great. This is great, and I'm learning lots. I'm learning there's a nuance there. All right, let's move on to what does the future hold? What are you most excited about?
The most exciting trends are the falling cost of batteries, and it's really boring. So everyone wants to say, okay, well, this new amazing tech, faster charging battery, etc. Really, EVs are already better than petrol cars will ever be. So we're done on that. Yes, they will get better, but they're already better. So what we've got to do is increase the access to them.
Well, actually,
so the really exciting technologies are the ones.
Actually, when I first got my car, the Tesla, I showed a friend and he joked. He was like, it's like a laptop on wheels when I described it. So outside of just the performance, I said, this car is much better than when I first bought it because it upgrades like your phone. It's just got a better operating system, everything else. And he just called it, it's a laptop on wheels. And it got me. I was like, yeah, kind of is. The way your operating system updates, the new features that pop up, the self-driving that's just getting better and better. It's like, oh, wow, okay, the safety feature, So, I mean, that outside of just the performance.
They occasionally make them more powerful. They can sometimes they go, actually, we're going to change the configuration of the way we release energy, and your car is now faster, which is quite fun. That's because of the fundamental simplicity of the drivetrain that you can do that. You see a lot of people saying that as a derogatory term, like because they're used to
you comment in my drivetrain
of the petrol car, but Well, yeah, exactly. Oh, I love the hum of my engine. It's like, that's cool, man. That's absolutely fine. But all you're doing is chatting nostalgia. That's all there is. There's nothing else below that. And you and some mates might convince yourself that there's something tangible there. There isn't. And it's fine for you to love it. I mean, as I say, I'm susceptible too. I love a V8. I love a V12 myself. But it is just nostalgia. That's all you're talking about on that side.
Elon Musk, I think he said something which made me giggle as well. It's like riding petrol cars is in the future is going to be like riding horses.
Yeah.
You might be nostalgic. I like a good gallop now and then. But in terms of efficiency and usage and practicality, like... No.
Yeah, exactly. As a road car, they're just... They'll be obsolete, but if they aren't already, then they will be very, very soon.
So you're excited about the costs?
So exciting things are make
batteries.
It cheap.
Yep.
Yeah, because I think these are great, and I want more people to have them. And the way you do that is you get the cost down, and the costs. There's loads of things which go into that, such as resource abundance. Okay, if we get a pinch point on cobalt, we're moving to LFP, where there's no cobalt in it at all. LFP is the majority of batteries being made today, by the way. So you get this, that EVs are terrible because of the child miners in the Congo. So, well, they're not taking... a bunch do. NMC technology does use cobalt, but mass market EVs don't use cobalt now.
Okay.
You wouldn't know that from public discourse, right? Anyway, that's on the side. So that's that side of it. The bits that I find really exciting at the moment. I love being at Pod Point. If I worked at another firm, I'd like to work at Redwood Materials, who are the leading US firms. The guy who's the CTO at Tesla, JB Straubel, left Tesla in 2019 to go full-time in his side project, which is the recycling of batteries.
Right, yeah.
So they're taking rubbish and they're turning it into anodes and cathodes. And what they can do, it means that like the geopolitical angle on this, as well as sustainability, is crazy. So they run a battery through their process. They get all the base metals out as the input, sort of precursors for everything goes back into a battery, and they retain like 95% of the metals on all.
Wow.
And you're like, well, hang on a minute. There comes a point, if you get this system to work fully, where you hardly need any virgin material. That's hugely exciting from a sustainability standpoint. Obviously, we're decades out from that because we've got to convert millions of road vehicles before we get to that point. But we will. The geopolitics, a lot of people are very worried about China having such dominance in the supply chain. And he was recently making a really interesting point. He goes, yeah, they do. And they make it and they put it in consumer electronics. You know what they do with it? They largely ship it to the West.
Yeah, right.
Their job is pulling those consumer components apart and getting the metals back out.
Yeah, right.
And it's like, oh, well, that's a really interesting framing.
Yeah.
So ultimately, the people who ultimately
the destination
benefit from that material it ends up is the destination.
Yeah, right.
And so if you're a successful Western economy, you've got this massive untapped resource. So that's profoundly exciting. And people get very excitable about robo-taxis, that kind of stuff. We'll see when that arrives. If you ask some people, it'll be never. And if you ask Elon, it'll be Tuesday. We'll see what happens with that. Yeah. And once you get to the point where the robot drives the car, what happens to the physical car?
Yeah.
And what happens to car companies? So BMW with their ultimate driving machine, if it doesn't have a steering wheel, what are they competing on then? Yeah,
different paradigm, I suppose.
What does that space become? Those are all really interesting ideas. Yeah. We haven't seen massive progress towards them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, for me, it's take this thing properly mass market, make it so a car is just electric by default. For me, just get away from the absolute madness of being this political football, which we are at the moment. So we're just about cars. You shouldn't be able to tell anyone's political opinions on the basis they drive an electric car. It's like, he bought the car that was better.
But cool. And so, all right, so you're excited about the dropping cost, the adoption. Again, this just being a no-brainer, really. And I think we touched on the not necessarily the V2X, but the opportunities for you in the organisation in terms of the revenue streams by helping
100%.
Those networks stabilise their grids, which is super
100%.
super fascinating.
And I guess that the other thing is like, if we look at that environmental piece, the CO2 stuff, I mean, the UK is doing a hell of a job of decarbonising its grid. So far, we got more to do, but we've done unbelievably well. It's now getting more thorny. Let's say we go 10, 15 years ahead. I think we're flipping it, so the incentives are moving towards the carbon-free alternatives in most industrial fields, right? I think we're going to put quite a big dent in emissions pretty soon. I think we might already have gone through peak emissions.
Yes, so
we'll start to see, hang on a minute, we can change this. We can actually do stuff about this. I think that's going to be quite an interesting thing for humanity, where you're like, it's one thing to go to a moon, it's one engineering project. To change the way the entire world's economy operates, often feels too hard to do. I think to stand at that and say, well, hang on a minute, we are actually really changing this.
We're at the precipice.
This is pretty immense. Will be, imagine if CO2 emissions was a good news story. Be kind of mad, right? At the moment, it's just people going, "Oh, it's all doom and gloom." I think that will change in the next 10, 15 years.
Last question. I'm very interested in your experience. As you said,
second question.
You're question number 3. I've got a shit ton of editing to do after this one.
Wow, it's a 10-minute episode. Yeah. Well done, mate.
But no, it's been fantastic. But I did want to ask you about, as you said, you're one of the longest standing members of Pod Point, 8-person team all the way through to IPO. What was that experience like, going from a small team, growing the business, and then taking it through IPO?
Awesome is the answer. The first thing to say is I'm not in the senior management team at Pod Point. So the founder's a chap called Eric, who I'm incredibly good. I've been in touch with him a bit since he's left. He's a bit of a hero of mine, and seeing what he dealt with in terms of risk to the business, his baby, and the stress and how he handled that remained positive throughout. You learn an enormous amount from someone like that, and brilliant stuff. We brought on a lady called Jill Howard, who left last year as well. Immense individual that I'm really privileged to learn a lot from. The really key thing I think that I learned is that if you succeed at anything, it never feels like you are in the moment, particularly in sort of business, because if it's gone well, you don't deal with it day to day. Everything that's not that needs fixing is what you deal with day to day. So all you ever deal with is problems, and success is only apparent in the rearview mirror. It's like when you go, holy crap, look where we came. If things are going really well, you're getting more problems. If things are going badly, you're dealing with the same problem.
Yeah, right.
So success is different problems.
Yeah.
And failure is the same problem over and over until you stop. Right? So that I think is a really key thing to bear in mind. Like, and I think Instagram tries to tell you the opposite. When we try to image craft, right? It's like if someone's thing is just endless shiny beaches, and stuff like that, then maybe that's not the reality of their existence. By any measure, what Teddy Eric achieved with Pod Point, taking it through IPO, is a stellar success. If you look at people who manage to set up a firm and even keep it running 5 years, there's a very small proportion. People who then managed to,
and the timeline
had some financial success as well.
As you mentioned, like when the organization started, as you say, you're like literally lifting, charges into So even in the early days when it was a crazy idea, and to live it through to going public, that's amazing. And I love what you just said, and I think
it is amazing. And sorry,
I was just saying, I love what you just said, and I think it's a really important point to note. And I think I work on this sort of stuff with my customers a lot, in that it's really important for team morale, a whole bunch of reasons, to again do that, like sing and shout about the little wins, realize that. And the whole analogy, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the hero's journey. You need to, move away from the known world into the unknown world, go through the road of trials. The ultimate boon, the realization, the sword from the stone, all that sort of stuff. Bring it back and integrate into your day to day. So bring it back to the village, or whatever. Whole other topic to talk about the hero's journey, but just as a framework, I'm a big fan of that. But I think, and this was adding a bit of an epiphany when I was presenting this to customers. And funnily enough, I don't know how much of a gamer you are. I'm a big fan of the Alan Wake game, but in Alan Wake 2, without giving too much away, they played with this same idea that it's actually not a circle. So you think like the hero's journey, going on this journey as an individual, team, or organization, it's very challenging. It has to be. for many reasons we won't get into. But the importance is coming back and bringing that and evolving the team, the individual or the organization. You actually elevate yourself by going on that journey. So it's actually not a cycle, it's a spiral. And as you go out, you're actually, right. But when you're on that, when you're on that spiral, you don't realize how much you're actually achieving. So it is important to stop and look down and go, oh, I'm on a spiral and I'm on the next level of that spiral. And oh my gosh, this is really important to understand. And as you say, I love the way you put that. Like, if you're dealing with more and more different diverse problems, chances are you're on a good trajectory, you're on a positive growth path, let's say. If you're dealing with the same problems again and again, you might want to stop and think about where you are on that trajectory, which direction.
Right. But I think that what you said there about recognition is massive, because if success is problems, they're different problems every day, then that doesn't feel like success. Yeah. But if you do take that chance, so if you're at the top of your spiral, as you put it, to force your team to say, look where you were and look where you came. Like, remember when we were there and we'd have given anything for that thing that you already delivered by Q1 and now you've forgotten about, and you just accept as part of sort of the granted world. If you don't do that periodically, then you're missing a real opportunity to make people feel valued and to I guess value themselves and their own work, because we just assume that our successes are done and we forget about them, we move on, and all we ever think about is negative, because you have to, otherwise your organization won't get anywhere. But taking that time to recognize it, and I think that IPO day was brilliant for exactly that reason, right? That was awesome, going on the balcony, being up far too early, drinking champagne. Like, it was, that was as a moment, it was absolutely colossal. And whatever happens from that point on, you just have to say that really was immense, because we were there in the little place with the mice running around the bins. And it was a long way from then.
Right. I think really important for, especially because many organizations, they're under some sort of pump to achieve some sort of outcome quarter by quarter, whatever the case may be. But the thing with cycles is, as soon as one finishes, the next one begins straight away. So it is a bit of this rat race, treadmill that, it can really over time just bring you down. So as you say, like, well, hold on, all right, it's challenging, but hey, we're on this new level, we're doing new challenges. And to your point, we would have given anything to now what we just did through a breeze in Q1. Like, just think of that and that sort of stuff. 100%. Wow. All right, James, I think I'm going to try
to question 3, or are we going to have all day?
I'm gonna try to summarize our conversation in three bullet points. Let's see how we go. But no, look, it's been fantastic talking to you, and I think the 3 key takeaways, to boil it down, first, some of the positives. So around the adoption of EVs, so the emission reductions, I think top of mind for many people. I will call out again the energy security and reducing the conflicts, I think, globally. Because I think
absolutely right.
Because I think there's...
You said that and I didn't, but it is absolutely valid, 100%.
And I think just we spoke a bit about supply chains of different materials for different components of this industry, let's say. But if we look at the current alternative, like the conflicts there for those reasons. And I think without getting into geopolitics, which I'm not an expert on, but there's some really interesting trends that I have observed and read about, where when countries are contained and they're good on resources, there's no incentivization to go off and meddle with other regions. So I will call that one out. So point 1, emission reduction and energy security, reducing conflicts. Number 2, I always saw EVs, electric vehicles, as a drain on the grid, but now and we touched on it, the microgrids, solar power, V2X, seeing they're actually helping stabilize the grids. And owners can actually generate, revenue, loyalty points for doing so, and that varies. And it sounds like Pod Point's really at the forefront of driving a lot of that innovation and, a new revenue stream, which is fantastic, which I suppose brings me to number 3. So the scale is bigger and more diverse than people realize, more than I realized. Being more affordable for consumers. Again, everyone really focuses on initial cost, but total cost of ownership becomes a no-brainer very quickly. And to your point, all the costs really driving very quickly downwards. Next few years is going to be even more so. And again, to the point I just raised, the diverse revenue streams for different types of businesses leaning into this market, let's say. So I think those for me were the 3 key takeaways. But yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. I think
that's as good a 3 takeaways as there could be in what was quite a wide-ranging conversation. So my only thing I'd say is it's always awesome to chat to you, pal. Thank you very much for inviting me on.